Listen to me carefully. Your neighbors are not your allies when the lights go out. The first 24 hours of a blackout, people stay polite. By day 3, they start counting, watching, listening, measuring who has food, who has heat, who still has light. And this isn't paranoia, it's documented reality. FEMA reports show that during prolonged outages, property crime spikes by over 300% within the first 5 days. And a shocking percentage of those incidents aren't strangers breaking in. They're neighbors targeting neighbors. During the 2021 Texas grid failure, investigators found that many thefts weren't random. They happened inside the same streets, the same apartment blocks, the same communities where people knew exactly who was prepared. Because in a blackout, your biggest threat isn't some gang from across town. It's the person who lives 3 doors down, watching your windows, listening for your generator, waiting for you to slip up. So right now, I'm going to show you 9 signs your neighbors are already watching you. And if you ignore these, you won't realize you're a target until it's too late. Number 9. The window audit effect. When darkness makes your home a stage. Here's something most people don't realize until it's already happening. During a blackout, your neighborhood becomes a surveillance grid without cameras. The moment the power dies, human beings instinctively start monitoring each other. And the first place they do it? Your windows. Because in a blackout, windows become the only source of information. Think about it. No news, no internet, no streetlights, no outside signals. So what do people do? They watch. They look for movement. They look for light flickers. They look for silhouettes. In behavioral psychology, this is called environmental scanning under stress. And it spikes dramatically during crises. A 2022 disaster response study from the University of Delaware found that in prolonged outages, over 65% of residents admitted they actively monitored neighboring homes within the first 48 hours. Not out of malice at first, but out of uncertainty. And uncertainty turns into suspicion fast. Here's the terrifying part. Even tiny signs give you away. The reflection of a phone screen, a flashlight beam hitting the ceiling, even the faint glow of LED appliances. During the 2003 Northeast blackout, emergency reports documented multiple cases where households with visible interior light became focal points for neighborhood attention within hours. People start asking questions. How do they have power? Do they have supplies? Are they hiding something? And once your house becomes a question mark, it becomes a target. This is why blackout survival isn't just about food or generators, it's about visual discipline. Professional security teams call this light signature control. You want to look like everyone else. No flickers, no shadows moving room to room. Even your curtains matter. Standard blinds leak light like a lighthouse under stress conditions. Blackout curtains, foil insulation panels, even hanging thick blankets over windows can reduce visibility by over 90%, according to FEMA home hardening guidelines updated after the California wildfire outages. During a blackout, your neighbors aren't just bored. They're mentally tallying who looks comfortable, who looks desperate, and who looks prepared. And the window is where they take inventory. If they can see you thriving, they won't forget it. Number 8. The sound map. Giveaway. When your house becomes the only noise, let me tell you something that sounds almost ridiculous until you live through it. In a real blackout, sound travels like it's amplified. The neighborhood becomes unnaturally quiet. No HVAC units, no TVS, no traffic hum, no background noise. And in that silence, your house becomes an audio beacon. Most people think neighbors are watching with eyes. No, they're watching with ears first. This is called acoustic awareness under deprivation, and it's been documented in siege conditions, long-term power failures, even war zones. After Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico police data showed that homes producing consistent mechanical noise generators, power banks with fans, inverter hums were 4 times more likely to be approached by strangers compared to silent homes, because noise means resources, noise means capability, noise means you have something worth taking. And neighbors notice patterns fast. If your generator runs every evening at 7 p.m., congratulations, you just created a predictable schedule for desperation. Even smaller sounds matter. A microwave beep, a battery-powered radio, even loud conversation indoors when everything else is dead quiet. During the Texas 2021 freeze blackout, sociologists studying neighborhood dynamics found something chilling. Resource-rich homes were identified not by sight but by sound first, because people were listening for life. That's what a blackout does. It turns human beings into radar systems. The smart move is what security experts call noise discipline. You stagger activity. You avoid consistent patterns. You insulate sound sources with dense materials like cinder block shielding or even vehicle sound deadening mats. Some preparedness manuals recommend running loud equipment only during peak ambient noise windows early morning when people are moving, or during storms when wind masks sound. This isn't paranoia. This is operational reality. In burglary studies published in Criminology and Public Policy in 2020, perceived occupancy and detectable activity influence target selection more than locks or alarms. In a blackout, your neighbors aren't thinking like friends anymore. They're thinking like survivors, and survivors listen. If your house becomes the only one that sounds alive, you've just put a spotlight on yourself made of silence. Number 7. The supply curiosity spiral. When questions become intelligence gathering. Now here's one that people underestimate. Until it's too late, the moment neighbors start asking casual questions during a blackout, you are no longer in a friendly conversation. You are being profiled. It starts innocent. Hey, you guys doing okay? Do you have any extra water? How long do you think this will last? But what's really happening is something disaster psychologists call resource probing. Humans do this subconsciously when survival uncertainty rises, and blackout conditions accelerate it fast. According to a 2023 National Emergency Preparedness Behavioral Report, by day 3 of a grid failure scenario, over 70% of households begin comparing supplies indirectly through conversation, not because they want to steal immediately, but because they want to locate the strongest source of stability nearby. And stability becomes a magnet. Every answer you give becomes data. If you say, "We're fine, we stocked up," you've just declared strength. If you say, "We have a generator," you've declared advantage. Even refusing to answer creates suspicion. This is why intelligence professionals teach something called information minimization. In crisis environments, you don't overshare. You don't explain. You deflect. You normalize. The goal is to appear mildly inconvenienced, not secure. You give vague answers. "Yeah, we're managing, same as everyone." That's it. Because once people label you as the prepared house, you become the mental emergency backup plan for everyone else. And backup plans turn into demands when hunger sets in. In the 1977 NYC blackout, documented neighborhood coalition thefts often began with simple conversations days earlier. Who had candles? Who had food? Who had radios? That's how targeting starts. Not with violence, with curiosity. During blackouts, neighbors become informal investigators without realizing it. They gather details the way people gather gossip, except now it's survival intelligence. So number 7 is this. When questions increase, observation increases. And when observation increases, risk increases. Your best defense isn't weapons. It's controlling what people think you have. Because in a prolonged outage, your supplies aren't just supplies. They become neighborhood currency. And you never want your name attached to wealth when the lights stay off. Number 6. The routine leak. Signal when your daily patterns become a target schedule. Most people don't understand this until they're living inside the blackout. But after the first 24 hours, your neighbors stop watching your house randomly. They start watching you systematically. And the number one thing they're tracking isn't your supplies, it's your routine. Because in a grid-down neighborhood, routine becomes intelligence. If you step outside at the same time every morning, if you cook at predictable hours, if you keep checking your car, if you open your door repeatedly, you are broadcasting structure. And structure tells people something terrifying. You have a plan. You have resources. You're organized. And desperation is drawn to organization, like moths to flame. This is backed up by criminology research. A 2021 study from the European Journal of Security Studies found that in disaster-related property crimes, over 60% of targeted incidents occurred after offenders observed behavioral patterns first, not immediately. In other words, people don't strike when the lights go out. They strike when they understand your rhythm. Think about it. During a blackout, time becomes blurry. People don't know what day it is. There's no schedule. That's why anyone who looks consistent becomes noticeable fast. If your neighbor sees you calmly doing the same walk at dusk each night, they aren't thinking, "Wow, he's disciplined." They're thinking, he's not panicking, so he must be stocked. Even worse, routines create predictable vulnerability windows. If you always leave the house for 10 minutes at 8 p.m. to check something outside, congratulations, you've just given the entire street your unguarded moment. Police data from post-disaster zones like Hurricane Katrina showed that most home intrusions happen during brief repeated absence windows, not during total evacuations. The danger isn't just outsiders. It's neighbors who know exactly when your guard is down. That's why blackout survival experts talk about randomization tactics. You vary movement. You minimize visible activity. You do not become the house that looks structured. Because in a blackout, structure is interpreted as strength, and strength becomes a target. The safest home isn't the one that looks prepared. It's the one that looks confused enough to be ignored. So if you want to stay invisible, you break your own habits. You act boring. You act tired. You act like everyone else. Even if inside, you're 10 steps ahead. Number 5. The light discipline failure. The smallest glow that gives away everything. Let me tell you something most people never think about. In a blackout, light becomes louder than sound. It's not just illumination, it's a declaration. One tiny glow in the wrong moment tells the entire block that you have power, batteries, fuel, or stored equipment. And humans are biologically wired to notice light in darkness instantly. Military survival manuals call this light signature exposure, and it's treated as one of the most dangerous mistakes in contested environments. During the 2019 Venezuela nationwide blackout, residents reported that homes with even brief interior light leaks became immediate points of attention, not because people were evil, but because people were desperate for answers. How do they have light? Do they have a generator? Are they hoarding? That suspicion spreads like wildfire. FEMA's updated emergency security guidance notes that property crime risk rises sharply in neighborhoods where resource inequality becomes visible, and light is the fastest inequality marker possible. Here's the part people don't know. Blackout visibility works differently. Your eyes adapt. What seems dim inside your home becomes a beacon outside. A single candle 2 rooms back can be seen through a cracked blind from 100 feet away. Even worse, modern devices betray you. Power banks have LED indicators. Flashlights spill through curtains. Motion lights can trigger accidentally. And once neighbors see it once, they start watching for it again. This creates what psychologists call confirmation surveillance. Once someone suspects you have resources, they keep checking until they feel certain. That's how targeting begins. The correct strategy is total light discipline. Blackout curtains, layered barriers, basement-only illumination, no window-adjacent lighting at all. Some high-level preppers even build dark zones inside their house, where all activity happens away from external visibility. Because the truth is brutal. In a prolonged blackout, the person with visible light is advertising survival. And in a desperate neighborhood, survival attracts predators faster than hunger itself. Staying alive isn't just about having supplies. It's about never letting anyone know you do. Number 4. The neighbor gathering trap. When community meetings become recon missions. This one is dangerous because it feels so normal. During the early stages of a blackout, people start gathering outside. Someone says, let's check on each other. Someone suggests a neighborhood meeting. Someone wants to coordinate. And on the surface, that sounds like community. But underneath, it's reconnaissance. Because anytime humans lack information, they form groups to extract it. In disaster sociology, this is called informal resource mapping. And it happens in every prolonged outage scenario. People want to know who has what, who has food, who has water, who has medical supplies, who has a generator. And those gatherings become intelligence exchanges, whether anyone admits it or not. A 2020 Homeland Security behavioral analysis found that in extended emergency events, neighborhoods naturally form resource hierarchies, within the first week identifying strong homes, weak homes, and priority targets for request or pressure. And here's the ugly reality. Once you are identified as strong, you don't get left alone. You get recruited, depended on, and eventually resented. Those meetings often start with cooperation and end with expectation. You have a generator, right? You stocked up, didn't you? Suddenly, your private preparation becomes public property in their minds. In the 1977 blackout, multiple incidents began with neighbors checking in. then escalating into group confrontation when supplies ran low. This is why experienced preparedness advisors recommend polite distance. You do not disclose. You do not volunteer details. You listen more than you speak. You keep your profile neutral, because in a blackout, community can be a shield, or it can become the mechanism that identifies you as the house worth targeting. The gathering trap isn't about avoiding people forever. It's about understanding that in crisis, social spaces become information markets, and if you trade too much of your truth, you may end up paying for it later with your safety. Number 3. The doorway test. When neighbors measure your weakness with one knock, by the time a blackout hits day 4 or 5, something changes in the neighborhood that most people don't notice until it's staring them in the face. The knocks become different. They're no longer friendly. They're no longer casual. They become tests. This is what security experts call the doorway assessment phase, the moment when desperate people stop asking and start evaluating. A neighbor comes over with a weak excuse, just checking in. But what they're really doing is scanning your posture, your tone, your emotional stability, your response speed. Did you open the door immediately? Did you hesitate? Did you look calm? Did you look stressed? Because in prolonged outages, humans begin unconsciously sorting households into categories: strong, weak, useful, vulnerable. And the doorway is where that sorting happens. Studies from post-disaster behavioral response, including a 2018 analysis after Hurricane Irma, found that personal boundary interactions increased dramatically after 72 hours, and households that appeared composed and stable received 3 times more follow-up visits than households that looked depleted. Why? Because people instinctively orbit stability when fear takes over. But stability becomes danger. If your neighbor thinks you're okay, they assume you have something: food, water, batteries, warmth, and once one person suspects it, that information spreads, not through malice at first, but through panic gossip. They seem fine over there. That's all it takes. Then another knock comes, then another, and eventually it stops being a request and becomes pressure. That's how the 1977 New York blackout escalated in multiple residential blocks, not with immediate violence, but with repeated social probing that slowly turned into confrontation. The smartest thing you can do is treat every knock like intelligence gathering. You don't open wide. You don't invite anyone inside. You control your doorway like it's a checkpoint. You speak through a cracked opening. You keep your body language tired, rationed, inconvenienced, not thriving, because thriving is provocative. And here's the part no one wants to admit. In long blackouts, your neighbors aren't always watching to steal. Sometimes they're watching to decide who will break first, and who can be pushed when hunger arrives. The doorway test is where predators learn if you're soft. Don't give them the answer. Number 2, the group shift phenomenon. When one neighbor turns into 3. This one is terrifying because it's subtle. In the beginning, a neighbor approaches alone. Maybe they ask for a candle. Maybe they want water. But as the blackout stretches longer, that dynamic evolves into something much more dangerous: group escalation. Sociologists call this the coalition survival shift, and it's one of the most consistent patterns in prolonged disaster zones. Individuals stop operating as individuals. They begin moving as packs. Not because they're evil, because groups reduce fear and increase leverage. One person asking feels like a request. 3 people asking feels like pressure. 5 people asking becomes intimidation. And this is not theory. FEMA after-action reports from multiple extended outage events show that neighborhood groups form organically within the first week, especially when supply scarcity becomes real. The reason is simple. People feel powerless alone, but powerful together. And here's where it gets dangerous for you. If even one neighbor suspects you have more than them, they may not come back alone next time. They may bring support. And now the conversation is no longer equal. It's a resource negotiation under threat. During the Texas freeze blackout, multiple residents later reported that mutual aid groups quickly became entitlement groups, expecting those who were prepared to distribute supplies. That sounds humane until you realize the darker psychology underneath. Preparation becomes interpreted as obligation. You have extra, so you should share. And when you don't, resentment grows fast. In criminology research published in 2022, desperation-driven theft increases sharply when groups feel morally justified, not criminal. That's the danger. Neighbors don't see it as stealing. They see it as reclaiming fairness. That's why staying low profile matters more than being armed. A weapon stops one person. It doesn't stop a socially justified group. The best defense is never becoming the house that gets talked about as the stalked one. Because once you become a community rumor, you become a community resource in their minds. And in blackout psychology, community resources get taken. Number 1. The preparedness visibility curse. The moment you stop being a neighbor and start being a target. This is the final truth, and it's the most brutal one of all. In a long blackout, your survival isn't determined by what you own. It's determined by what people believe you own. Because preparedness is invisible only until you accidentally reveal it. The moment your neighbors label you as ready, you stop being part of the neighborhood's social fabric, and you become a supply node. That is the preparedness visibility curse. History proves it. In every prolonged collapse scenario, from Venezuela's outages to Bosnia's siege conditions to Hurricane Katrina, the households that survived best weren't always the most stocked. They were the most discreet, because visibility creates resentment, and resentment creates targeting. When people are cold, hungry, exhausted, and embarrassed by their own lack of preparation, seeing someone else thriving feels like injustice. That psychological mechanism is called relative deprivation aggression, and it's one of the strongest predictors of interpersonal violence during disasters. A 2019 crisis behavior study found that communities fracture fastest, not from lack of supplies, but from perceived inequality of supplies. That's why the blackout is not just an energy failure. It's a social failure. The lights going out removes modern accountability. No cameras, no police response, no normal consequences. And once that happens, your biggest danger isn't strangers. It's familiar faces recalculating you through a survival lens. The neighbor who smiled at you last month is now doing mental math. They have food, my kids don't. That's where the curse begins. The only way to beat it is operational humility. You blend, you appear average. You control signals: light, sound, routine, conversation, demeanor. You don't become the standout house, because the standout house becomes the story. And stories spread faster than hunger. In a grid-down world, your home is either invisible or it's next. That's the difference between lasting quietly and becoming the neighborhood solution by force. The blackout doesn't create monsters. It reveals the survival instinct hiding inside ordinary people. And the more prepared you are, the more dangerous it becomes if anyone finds out. Stay smart, stay dark, stay forgettable. And that's the part nobody wants to say out loud. When the grid goes down, society doesn't collapse all at once. It collapses quietly, street by street, house by house, neighbor by neighbor. Because the longer the lights stay off, the more people stop thinking like friends and start thinking like survivors. They're not watching you because they're evil. They're watching because fear is growing. Supplies are shrinking, and desperation always needs a direction. And the truth is brutal. In a blackout, the safest house isn't the strongest one. It's the one that no one notices. So stay dark, stay smart, stay invisible. Control what people see. Control what people believe. Because once the neighborhood decides you have more than them, you don't just become prepared. You become a solution they feel entitled to take. If you want the next part of this series, the real tactics that keep you off the radar when the outage stretches into weeks, make sure you subscribe, because most people will learn these lessons the hard way. And remember, when the lights go out for real, the person watching you might already know your name.